All right, so meta defined part one: how to balance the perfect game. New video. I have not seen this before, so yeah, let's see what it's all about. This was suggested to us by the creator of the video himself. So yeah, let's see. Let's see what do we think about it. Let's go Peach. Wrong color though. Oh, the real Peach gets fucked up. Feels bad.
It's 2002, 1 year after Super Smash Bros. Melee was released, and before the competitive scene really started to take shape. During this time, esports as we know it really only
I was gonna say, chilling dudes started taking my bees early.
existed in one place, South Korea. While the rest of the world laughed at the idea of competitive video games ever reaching a mainstream audience, South Korean organizations had already begun forming teams of players to play the real-time strategy game STARCRAFT Brood War. Televised matches on major South Korean networks soon became the norm, and competitive StarCraft took off. Today, 22 years after its release, Brood War is still played competitively. This is especially impressive considering the sequel, StarCraft 2, was released in 2010. Most impressive of all, however, is that Brood War has not received a balance patch for the game since 2001. What this means is that every aspect of the StarCraft metagame has developed independently from Blizzard over the past 19 years. As new players and strategies emerged, the meta redefined what was and was not possible.
Like, of course I'm biased here, but that's something I feel like is cool with these games that don't get patches. Sure, you could argue that, like, Melee, for example, got a patch with PAL, but let's be honest. Most of the players, never played PAL or basically never played it, right? So, yeah, it's cool with these games how they, like, you basically have to, like, just accept how the game is and overcome, like, your issues, things you find annoying, things you find very strong, matchups you find hard. You never can, like, rely on, like, the developers to, like, help you out. You gotta, like, help yourself out. So it's like, yeah, similarities between these two games.
Even when a remastered version of the game was released in 2017, Blizzard deliberately did not change a single thing that would directly affect the game's balance in order to preserve what makes the game so great. But there was one thing that did change in this long history. While the players continued to develop new strategies and techniques to push their respective races to the limit, it would be a lie to say the
Courier, thank you for the 5 months.
From the players alone. Instead, changing the maps available to the players allowed the community to affect the balance of the game without directly changing anything that made the game so great. For example, if early strategies were becoming too powerful, switching to a map with a larger distance between bases gave the defender more time to prepare their defenses, effectively nerfing early rush strategies and incentivizing players to play differently. Similarly, if a map had a long grounded travel time between bases but a short aerial travel time, you're more likely to see strategies that rely on aerial-based combat or drop-based strategies. In the most extreme example, if you have a player like Flash, arguably the greatest esports player of all time, who hadn't lost to a Protoss player in a best-of-5 in 11 years, yes, you heard that right, 11 years for a game that has 3 races. He never lost to one of them for 11 years.
That's actually crazy. That's actually crazy impressive. As someone that's, like, known for consistency, that actually sounds absurd. Yeah, that's actually, yeah. Now, I'm not going to pretend I know, honestly, really anything about StarCraft, but yeah, that sounds absolutely incredible. 11 years, it's such a long time. It's like 11 years ago, the first Genesis was about to happen. Honestly, exactly 11 years ago, Genesis 1 had still not happened yet. It was like in July at some point, 2009. So, yeah, that's really impressive. Really impressive.
You could intentionally alter the map pool to deliberately nerf Terran, the race that Flash plays, and end one of the longest streaks in esports history. All of this without ever patching how the game works. Okay, but what does StarCraft have to do with Melee? Well, when you compare the two games side by side, it quickly becomes clear how much they have in common, despite being fundamentally different genres. Let's try and break it down. Both games came out decades ago, yet still have strong competitive scenes to this day. Both games rely heavily on mechanics and APM, to the point where if a player has better tech skill, they can literally beat a superior strategy through speed alone. Both games have rich storylines and players across each era, and both games, against all odds, have managed to stay relevant for years in spite of sequels, competitors, and an ever-changing competitive scene. So because of all these similarities, it's clear that Melee and StarCraft can learn a lot from each other, particularly when it comes to balancing a game that is, in my opinion, already pretty close to perfect. How do you keep Melee fresh and interesting for years to come without fundamentally hurting the integrity of the game? Well, why not just copy what's already worked for StarCraft? What would happen if we changed the stage list in Melee? How much is...
Oh, alright, we are gonna keep listening, but that always sounds scary. Or maybe we'll bring up the past. Like, I know, like, in early tournaments for Melee, we had so many stages that honestly should never have been legal. If you looked at it, at first glance, it should be, like, red flags on, like, 2/3 of these stages. I was honestly one of the... to my knowledge, one of the first people that really tried to push for removing these shitty-ass stages. I do remember going to Genesis 1 and being more afraid of the rule set than any player. That's how, like, stupid a lot of these stages were. Some people will say, like, oh, but you counterpicked Mute City. Of course I did, because, you know, I was down 1-0. I was like, oh, it's best of 3, and I knew that Game 3 is probably going to be like some poke floats, like when I played against Loon Spectra. The rest of my opponents actually didn't pick these crazy stages. I would have been fine with no bullshit stages, but there's no way I could actually, you know if my opponent was going to pick one or not. Against Mewtwo, though, I had the gut feeling that he was not going to pick like Corneria or something. But yeah, no, it's, yeah. Crazy.
Stages influence the game in the first place. What would happen if we made our own stages? Well, that's exactly what we're going to answer in this video. Okay, but should we really influence the metagame of Melee? Like StarCraft, the version of Melee that's played today has essentially remained unchanged since shortly after its release in 2001. Wouldn't changing Melee mean fundamentally ruining what makes this game so great? Well, yes and no. The reality is that Melee has experienced enormous changes in its metagame since its inception, and these changes have come from player innovation and changes to rule sets. Let's take a look at the very first official Melee tier list.
Take a good look. A lot of people, like when new games comes out, when Ultimate came out, for example, a lot of people were like set in stone. Even before Ultimate came out, people were like, oh, Meta Knight needs to be nerfed in Ultimate. The game is not out. I saw a training mode combo, needs to be nerfed. Like, that type of mentality is very common. And then these same people move on to the next character. This one is busted, and it's like chain reaction from a lot of people. Now, I will say that these days, like when a new Smash game comes out, people know more what to look for, like what makes a character good, what makes a character bad. It's easier for like high-level players, especially to like start seeing trends early in a game's meta, than compared to like Melee when that was like, you know, basically the start of competitive Smash, right? So you see a lot of like things that are like very weird, like Mario. Why is Mario up here? Why is Zelda up here? Like, the top 4 is still like, to most people, these 4 characters are still in the top 5. These 4 characters and Puff, in no particular order, these are the top 5 characters according to 99.99% of the people. So it's some good stuff in here, of course. But yeah, you see some outliers like, you know, Pikachu very low, Puff crazy low, Falcon crazy low. So, and Yoshi, of course, as well. But that actually took a long time for that perception to change.
Made around the same time that Brood War was blowing up. Right off the bat, modern fans of the game can see opinions have really changed. Mario and Zelda at 5th and 6th. Captain Falcon at 15, Puff at 17, Bowser at 20. Actually, no, that was pretty obvious, I guess, even back then. Anyway, the point is, as new players and technical developments were discovered...
I will say, though, my first tournament I went to in 05, I already called it that Puff might have been the best character in the game. Which was in PAL, where the argument is even stronger. I will say it. Some people say I was ahead of my time. I sure as hell was.
Public opinions on matchups changed significantly. In fact, it wasn't uncommon to see characters in Melee jump several spots in the tier list, even late into its game, sometimes just because a single player started to learn how to abuse their strengths. But opinions on characters aren't the only thing that's changed. Stage lists have too. When the game first started, the stage list was obviously very different from how it is now, but it's amazing to look at the competitive stage lists in Melee that were used even a decade ago. For example, here's the stage list for Apex 2009. Okay, so Pokemon Stadium wasn't a counter pick yet, but Corneria, Jungle Japes, Rainbow Cruise, Green Greets, Butte City, Bryn Star, Congo Jungle, and Poke Floats were all legal counter pick stages. To put this in perspective, every single stage on the list that I just mentioned is now banned, and frankly, to a modern player, this stage list probably feels a bit ridiculous, especially when you consider how long the competitive scene had been around by 2009. So what changed? Well, like with StarCraft, the changes to the stage list were influenced heavily by characters and players. From the character side of things, one example is that any stage with a walk-off wasn't competitively viable due, among other reasons, to the existence of wave shining. On the other side of things, there are a lot of examples. In the case of Rainbow Cruise, you can basically thank PPMD for single-handedly inspiring the community to ban the stage after his victory over MTK at ROM 3. Throughout Melee's history, as the meta and players develop, our definition of acceptable stages has changed with it. Because of this, I'd argue it's completely reasonable to have an evolving stage list over time. And while I disagree with any proposed changes to Melee's balance in terms of characters, as it would likely do more harm than good, changing the stage list is a much more conservative approach to keeping the game fresh without fundamentally altering what makes it so great. For this reason, I think if the game ever became too stale, or one player was too dominant, changes to the stage list would be a great way to mix things up.
I mean, okay, I can see the point here, but I feel like stuff like that, then it turns like too subjective. It turns like, yeah, I feel like it gets like way too subjective. Like, oh, if a player is too dominant, if it gets too stale, it's like, where do you draw that line? Even if you're trying to be objective, you are not going to be entirely objective. I think it's absolutely impossible. Like, if your favorite player wins, then it's probably easier to like justify the dominance with like, oh, it's good for the game, it's fun. No, it's not too much dominance. So that part I don't really agree with. Like, I do see the point, right? You want to keep the game fresh and stuff, but I feel like that's the entirely wrong direction. I never feel like that should be a part of it. If it's obvious flaws in the game, let's say ledge camping for 8 minutes, then yes, a rule change needs to be like, you know, a rule for it needs to be like put in place. Just like the shooting clock in basketball. Sometimes a game have certain flaws that you can't really like get around without a rule change. But I don't think like, oh, we have, you know, perfectly, or besides stadium transformations, I guess, we have perfectly fine stages. So I don't feel like, oh, like a player is doing too good, so let's change something for the sake of changing. I personally feel like these are two different things. So yeah, obvious flaws within the game that needs to be like corrected. I'm fine when rules can change due to that. Yeah, whether it's like ledge camping, aerial planking, timeout scenarios, these type of things, yeah, but never like introduce new stuff because someone is winning too much. And some people might be like, oh, but that's basically the same thing, but it really isn't. It really isn't. And I hope people understand what I mean, but if I need to clarify more, then I will do that.
In fact, if you stop and think about it, Melee is in quite a unique position as a fighting game because its stages actually affect balance significantly. Most fighting games' stages operate as just a background for the fight, rather than something that plays a role in the matchup in any meaningful way. Even among other titles in other genres, it's not uncommon for major esports to have a single map for the game, like in the case of League of Legends. However, some of you might wonder how impactful the stage.
Thank you so much for the gifted sub, her.
It's easy to see the difference between playing on Battlefield versus playing on Poke Floats. One is a consistent neutral stage, the other is, well, not that. But the differences between the stage we do play on is still very significant. Within the tournament legal stages, there are actually a surprising number of differences between them. We do know the obvious ones, so I won't spend too much time on them. Stuff like FD having no platforms, which makes escaping combos difficult or straight up impossible, how bigger stages with higher blast zones make you live longer, whereas small stages make you die earlier, and bigger stages give you more room to play patiently, and smaller stages force interactions. But what about the less obvious differences?
I personally feel like this is like one of the very cool things with Smash, how, you know, each stage is like, yeah, it's like a lot of the stages like at first glance for someone that don't know about the competitive Smash, like some of the like smaller differences might not be too noticeable, or understanding why certain characters are significantly better at certain stages. But I do think it's cool how like, yeah, some characters do significantly better on some stages and significantly worse on some stages. It also sometimes can like push people to like play more characters, for example, which can be cool as well.
Yoshi's Story, Fountain, Final Destination, and Dreamland allow Fox and Falco to wall ride the stage when recovering, which makes ledge techs easier for them and other characters. Battlefield is not like that at all. It's a small difference, but it plays out in a big way in many matchups, and buffs certain edgeguarding options significantly. What about differences with platform size? Yoshi's has more narrow platforms, which makes it easier for certain characters to follow up, especially on reaction. On the other hand, Dreamland has wider platforms, which makes it much more difficult to follow up on tech chases or cover several options with a single move. Remember, we're talking about a game where a few frames can make a world of difference, so increasing the distance that a player travels after a tech can be all it takes to make a follow-up not possible on reaction. Platform heights also play an enormous role. Changing the height of platforms makes it so...
I mean, I understand the point here, but like... The reaction stuff, I would say, can be harder, but I can't really think of like key scenarios where it's like, oh, this is reactable on Yoshi's or Stadium, but it's not in Dreamland. I would say it's harder, but I wouldn't say... I can't really think of scenarios where it clearly goes from like possible to react to not possible. I would just say it goes from easy to a bit harder, if that makes sense. Because most of the time, tech in place is the hardest one to cover anyway, and that's going to be the same regardless of how wide the platform is. Honestly, now thinking about it, the key difference might be if a tech roll away, if the platform ends, then your animation is not going to like stop entirely, right? But on a platform that is like wider, then you keep rolling away, so you're like technically further away. That's like honestly probably the key scenario that I can think about. Red Cake, thank you for 12 months. Smash Daddy, I do set reviews. You can find the info below the stream if you're interested. But yeah, so sometimes I would say like, yeah, the roll away might make a follow-up period not possible, but also a lot of times in the first place, how you DI and where you land also have a massive impact.
Some options completely disappear by slightly moving the platform higher. Marth loses the ability to cover the top platform on Dreamland with a full hop. Peach struggles to make it to the top platform at all. On some stages, you can punish characters with short hops on the low platforms. Other stages, you can't. Recovery options and ledge options change a lot too. Most recoveries get a lot worse on FD, especially characters like Sheik, as landing on a platform instead of the stage can make things tricky to follow up. Once that option disappears, Sheik's recovery becomes a lot more predictable. Platforms also allow for ledge cancels, and some characters can even ledge dash onto them and retain invincibility. When you take all those things away, you're also taking away complex aspects of the game's strategy. Even differences that seem incredibly small actually matter a lot. Marth's down tilt covers quite a different angle on Yoshi's Story than it does on, say, Battlefield, simply because Yoshi's Story is slightly slanted downwards on the edges. As you can see, if I tried to seriously cover every subtle difference that affects the top tiers, it would probably take me over an hour, and I wouldn't even come close to covering them all. So what matters is this: subtle changes to a stage can seriously impact the game. There's almost a kind of butterfly effect when it comes to stage design, so it's crucial to pay attention to the little details. But how do all these changes actually affect matchups between characters? Well, thanks to the matchup calculator on iNeedData, we can actually get a pretty good idea, at least theoretically. Let's look at an example. Most players would probably agree that Marth beats Fox on Final Destination. The lack of platforms makes it so Marth's chain grab and combo flowchart is significantly more powerful, as Fox players cannot use the platforms to escape. On the other hand, Fox's up air combos can be SDI'd, which makes it harder for Fox to punish Marth as aggressively.
Poor SFAT.
So for the sake of simplicity, let's assume Marth and Fox go even on every other stage except for Final Destination. And let's be a bit bold and say on that particular stage, Marth should beat Fox 70% of the time, assuming both players are equally skilled. Well, let's watch what happens. You'll notice the matchup actually does not change at all in a best of 3, since it assumes that Fox players will always ban FD. But in a best of 5, suddenly the matchup is 60-40. So that 10% change in the matchup all came from a single stage. and even a more conservative estimate would still radically affect the matchup. But all of this is an oversimplification. Most players probably wouldn't agree that Marth and Fox go even on the other stages. However, the point isn't to argue about which stages Marth wins or which stages Fox wins. It's to demonstrate that a single stage can literally turn an even matchup into a 60-40 matchup just because of the current rule set. If we banned FD, and just FD, the matchup would change enormously. In fact, our entire tier list would probably change. For the sake of time, I encourage you to look at other examples on your own to see how stages play a role in the matchups.
I mean, like, yeah, this has been talked about over the years, you know, on occasion. Like, best of 3 and best of 5 have different rule sets, and in one way, it feels a bit silly, but at the same time, I feel like in best of 3, Elson Park, thank you for 39 months with Twitch Prime. Like, in one way, I feel like having your strongest stage available in the best of 3 is a little bit too brutal. While in a best of 5, of course, that particular match can be brutal, but I feel like it's enough games where it still can be justified. In a best of 3, if you lose game 1 and then you have to fight Marth and FD, for example, yeah, I think it like adds probably too much variance, and yeah, a little bit too brutal. But in best of 5, I feel like part of the challenge is beating people at their best stage. Like if you play against Mucha King, part of beating Mucha King in a best of 5 is to either overcoming an FD or taking that L. Or if you play against Hungerbox, part of the challenge of beating him is to play against him on Dreamland. And if you don't beat him on Dreamland, then you take the L for that game, right? But I don't know, like, I don't know. If someone ever suggested like a rules change in that regard, I probably don't feel too strongly about it. But yeah, I don't really feel like it's a right or wrong here. It's yeah, I can see the arguments for both sides pretty much. But for best of 5, yeah, I kind of feel like it's a fun part of the challenge. And in before people are like, oh, you're super biased, like let's be honest, like a lot of these matchups I ended up playing were still like losing matchups on paper, whether it was best of 5 or best of 3. So, but yeah, I can see the arguments for both sides.
If you're interested, I'll put some theoretical examples on screen, and you can pause to check them out. But remember, they're just theoretical. The interesting side of Melee is that it's far from solved, so examples like this are just opinions. Regardless, too often players fail to acknowledge how the existing stage list affects certain matchups. You cannot simply imagine matchups in terms of how it plays out on Battlefield alone. A single stage makes a huge difference, even if the edge that stage gives them is as subtle as 5%. Okay, so now we know that stages make a huge difference in Melee. Let's go back to that STARCRAFT example one more time. STARCRAFT uses maps instead of unit changes to balance the game, which kept it fresh and interesting for fans and players alike. But what would happen if Melee did the same thing? Stages aren't the only thing changing the meta in Melee, but they are the only balance changes that would come from rule set changes rather than player innovation. This means that we have more control over changes than just hoping the meta develops on its own. But what would happen if we started introducing new stages entirely? Let's pretend Nintendo doesn't hate us for 5 seconds, and imagine a world where new stages were introduced to keep the game fresh and interesting. Well, we actually already have custom stages in the game through 20XX, proving that this would be quite easy to implement if we wanted to, and if we were able to. If it was anything like STARCRAFT, an entire stage-making community could develop, and we'd pick the stages that we liked best. TOs and community leaders could collectively decide on potential stage lists and rotate them every 6 to 12 months to keep things fresh. Which leads us to the final question. Do we even want this? You know, if I'm being honest, I think it really depends on the state of the meta. Right now, I'm actually pretty happy where the meta is now, but I also think exploring concepts like this is a lot of fun. The way I see it, these kinds of changes are only necessary if the game starts to feel stale. And while Melee is fresh and interesting right now, I think it's useful to look at ways that we could keep pushing Melee in order to make it relevant for the next decade. I know the biggest barrier right now is Nintendo, but considering these ideas still serves a purpose. And ultimately, all I wanted to do with this video is to get players thinking, to get players to understand how impactful a stage actually is and explore the potential future of a game I love. My name is Radar.
I mean, it could be fun to have like new type of stages in one way, but as is brought up in the video, Nintendo is too much of a hassle. Like, even if the community wanted to, if UCF is such a headache, which is not even a visible change, like it's no way you can like even confirm if UCF is on screen. An experienced player can be like, it's very likely UCF is on due to like no missed dashback, but you can't even say for sure as an experienced player in that regard. And even then, Nintendo is like a headache. So I mean, I sadly feel like a discussion like this kind of like is out of the window due to like Nintendo alone, because a lot of the big tournaments would never ever consider something like this. Hypothetically, if Nintendo was not part of it, I'm still kind of skeptical if I would agree to it. Partly because I feel like we don't have any people that will remain objective whatsoever. And I don't feel like the game is like really at risk. I know that's also like brought up in the video, like if the meta gets too stale and stuff. But if I'm gonna be honest, I feel like if Melee ever truly gets too stale, I don't think stages can really save it. So even though at first glance new stages could be like fun, I feel like that the biggest issue is like how are you gonna find people that can like try to be as close to 100% objective as possible? A lot of people in this hypothetical scenario of adding stages, they would want to add stages that are fun for them personally to watch, that are good for their character to play on. And I wouldn't even trust myself to be, unbiased enough. I can't even think of any people that I would be like, yeah, I trust you to be in charge. I honestly can't think of any people. Like, top players would be biased due to like them want to win, right? Or them want to have fun. And low level players normally don't have like nearly enough knowledge to truly understand how we would impact. So who do we have left? TOs? Well, I mean, they also could, run into the issue of either not being knowledgeable enough or their preferences on what type of characters they enjoy seeing more. So it's an interesting idea at first glance, but I think it comes with too many issues personally.
And this has been the very first episode of Meta Defined. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell to get notified when I make my next video. And most importantly, share it with your friends. If you really want to help out, you can support me on Patreon, link in the description. Or, since I recently became a Twitch affiliate, if you have Twitch Prime you'd like to send my way, check out my stream. Finally, if you do want to see more of me, I've been doing weekly commentary during quarantine with my pal Save as Untitled for his Untitled Tournament series. You can check out the VODs on his channel, or tune in on Mondays and Tuesdays on his stream. Also, if you enjoyed the music in this video, all of the tracks are original, so let me know which ones you felt worked best. And most importantly, thank you to Evan Oliver for helping me with all the clips I recorded, and to Autumn K and all my patrons for supporting the channel. That's all for today, and I'll see you guys next time.
But yeah, I mean, overall, solid video. Brought up some interesting points. A lot of people might then understand how important, stages can be. I do think most people do understand it. Because like seeing, Sane, for example, play on FD, it becomes pretty obvious. But I mean, still overall solid video. Good work. A lot of people not knowledgeable about, StarCraft, so seeing some references, a little bit cool too. But yeah, overall, yeah, pretty good video. Make sure to give the channel, a sub. I'll do so myself. But yeah, please let me know, everyone, what do you guys think? Do you guys think we should introduce more stages in the future, or not? Will Nintendo be too much of an issue? Yeah, let me know.